In 2025, China recorded a trade surplus of over $1.2 trillion. That is not a typo. $1.2 trillion more than the entire GDP of most countries on Earth. And here's what makes that number truly disturbing. China achieved it by selling goods at prices that in many cases don't even cover the cost of making them. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is not an exaggeration. It is documented, verified, and right now, it is reshaping the global economy in ways most people don't fully understand. So today, we are going to break down exactly how China is doing this, why they are doing it, and most importantly, who is actually paying the price. Let's start with the basics. In international trade, there's a term called dumping. It means selling products in foreign markets at prices lower than the cost of production, or lower than what those same products sell for domestically. This is considered an unfair trade practice under World Trade Organization rules. And right now, China is doing it at a scale the world has never seen before. Here's the setup. China's domestic economy has a serious problem: weak consumer demand. Chinese households are saving money, not spending it. Real estate values have collapsed. Consumer confidence is low. So China's massive factories, which were built to serve both domestic and global markets, are producing far more than Chinese consumers can absorb. The result? A crushing wave of excess goods that need somewhere to go. And that somewhere is the rest of the world. Now, here's where it gets complicated. China's government isn't just sitting back and watching this happen. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Beijing spends approximately 1.7% of its entire GDP subsidizing Chinese companies, primarily the ones that export. In 2021, that translated to nearly $300 billion in subsidies. To put that in perspective, that is more than China's entire military budget that same year. These subsidies allow Chinese companies to do something no privately run business could survive doing for long-sell products. Below cost and still stay operational, the government absorbs the loss, the company keeps running, and foreign competitors who don't have that government safety net cannot keep up. This is not competition. This is a government-funded price war. Let's look at some real examples, because the numbers here are staggering. Take steel. In 2024, China exported 110.7 million metric tons of steel, a 22.7% jump from the prior year, and the highest export volume ever recorded in history. Why? Because domestic demand inside China hit a 6-year low. So instead of slowing down production, Chinese steel mills cranked up exports and flooded global markets with cheap steel. Countries from Brazil to South Africa to Mexico have now launched anti-dumping investigations against Chinese steel. Then there's solar panels. China's solar industry expanded aggressively between 2020 and 2023. Backed by massive government support, factories were built, capacity doubled, then doubled again. Today, global solar panel production capacity is running at roughly twice the level of actual global demand, and most of that excess capacity is in China. The result? A brutal price collapse. China's 5 biggest solar companies collectively lost $60 billion in 2024 alone. They quietly laid off 87,000 workers, nearly a third of their combined workforce, just to stay afloat. And yet, they kept selling panels to the rest of the world at prices no competitor could match. And then there are electric vehicles. Chinese EV makers like BYD are selling cars in international markets at prices that European and American manufacturers simply cannot compete with. The European Commission launched a full anti-subsidy investigation and ultimately imposed additional tariffs on Chinese EVs because the math didn't add up. The prices weren't reflecting real production costs. They were reflecting government support. So here is the core question. Why would China do this? Why would any country deliberately sell things at a loss? The answer is long-term market dominance. The strategy works like this. You flood a foreign market with your products at prices so low that local manufacturers cannot compete. Over time, those local manufacturers shut down. Factories close, workers lose jobs. The expertise, the supply chains, the institutional knowledge, it all disappears. And once that local industry is gone, it is extraordinarily difficult and expensive to rebuild. At that point, you, the exporter, now control the market. You can raise prices, you own the supply chain, and the importing country has made itself dependent on you. This is not speculation. This is exactly what has happened in multiple sectors across multiple countries. Now, let's talk about who is paying for all of this, because that bill is real, and it is being divided among several different groups. First, foreign workers and industries in the United States, Europe, Southeast Asia, Latin America, factories making steel, chemicals, solar panels, EVs, textiles, and dozens of other products are struggling or shutting down because they cannot match Chinese pricing. Countries like Indonesia have gone so far as to remove Chinese shopping apps from their app stores to protect small businesses. Turkey imposed a 40% tariff on Chinese vehicles. Pakistan levied a 30% tariff on multiple Chinese product categories. The pushback is global because the damage is global. Second, taxpayers in countries that retaliate. When governments impose tariffs to protect local industries, consumers pay higher prices on imported goods. When governments spend money on industrial policy to rebuild domestic manufacturing, that money comes from taxpayers. Either way, ordinary people absorb the cost of a trade war they never voted for. Third, and this is the part that often gets overlooked, Chinese workers themselves are paying a price. The overcapacity model is not sustainable even inside China. The solar industry's collapse wiped out 87,000 jobs. The steel sector is being forced to close 50 million tons of capacity this year. Workers in these industries face layoffs, wage cuts, and economic insecurity, all because the government pushed expansion far beyond what the market could support. Now, to be fair, there is a counterargument worth acknowledging. Some economists argue that cheaper goods are actually a benefit to importing countries. Lower prices mean consumers can buy more for less, and in the short term, that is true. When solar panels get cheaper, it accelerates the clean energy transition. When steel gets cheaper, construction costs drop. But the problem with this argument is that it only holds if the low prices are sustainable. If they are only low because of government subsidies that can be removed, or because a competitor is deliberately trying to capture a market and will raise prices once they've won, then those cheap goods come with a hidden long-term cost that consumers will eventually have to pay. The numbers tell a stark story. China today accounts for 27% of the world's entire industrial production. The United Nations projects that number could reach 45% by 2030. China represents 18% of global GDP, but only 15% of global consumption. It produces far more than it buys, and that gap between what it makes and what it consumes gets exported to the rest of the world. Despite representing 18% of global GDP, China accounts for just 15% of global consumption, but 35% of the world's manufacturing output. That structural imbalance has driven China's trade surplus up nearly 4,000% since the year 2000. 4,000%. The world has never seen anything like this. Not from Japan, not from Germany, not from any manufacturing powerhouse in history. China's surplus in 2025 exceeded 1% of total world GDP, roughly double the peak surpluses ever recorded by Japan or Germany at their heights. So where does this go from here? The honest answer is no one is entirely sure. The US has imposed sweeping tariffs, the EU has added duties on Chinese EVs and is investigating green tech. Countries across Asia and Latin America are following suit with their own protective measures. But here's the uncomfortable reality. Even with all these tariffs, China's exports keep growing. Beijing has simply rerouted sending more goods through ASEAN countries, through Mexico, through third-party markets that then ship to the US and Europe. The system is adapting, and the rest of the world is still catching up. What is clear is this: the era of assuming cheap Chinese goods are a free lunch is over. There is always a price. Sometimes it's a factory that closes in Ohio. Sometimes it's a solar company that collapses in Germany. Sometimes it's a government that goes into debt trying to rebuild an industry that took decades to lose and will take decades more to get back. China is selling everything at a loss. But somebody, somewhere, is paying the difference. And more often than not, that somebody is not Beijing. The question is no longer whether this is happening. The evidence is overwhelming. The data is undeniable, and the consequences are already unfolding in real time, in shuttered factories, in lost paychecks, in government debt that will take generations to repay. The question now is whether the world can build a coherent response before the dependency becomes irreversible. Because here is the uncomfortable truth about economic dependency: you rarely notice it until it is too late. Industries don't disappear overnight. They fade slowly, quietly, plant by plant, job by job, until one day you look around and realize you no longer know how to make the things you need.